Alright, well, I didn't think I'd ever be making a video like this, but hello YouTube. My name is Tyler, and I'm starting a drone business in Mendocino County, which is a small, unincorporated area of Northern California. We are a unique area, a blend of many, many different people, different cultures, religions, political beliefs. Everyone out here is relatively free. It's pretty quiet, beautiful area, pretty majestic place to live. And you saw the channels, or you saw the. Nah, I'm gonna have to cut that. You saw the video's title. You know, why did I quit my dream job to follow my dream, and you know, how did I make that distinction? And you know, I don't even know where to start really. I guess, you know, I should explain my dream job, which was I wanted to measure things with fair arms. I wanted to scan things. I like to measure things and find out things about them. It's kind of an obsession I didn't know I had until years ago. I was watching Hoonigan back when they were really big, back when Ken Block was alive, R.I.P. Ken Block, one of the greatest men alive, or to live. And they had a guy named Chair Slayer on there. I think his name is Dan. And he, you know, he started his own business after he did the Hoonigan stuff, and after he was on their team doing content for a while, and he started scanning roll cages for cars, and you know, he'd make roll cages custom for cars, and he's still doing it. I can't remember the name of his company now, but I'll put a link up. I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. I thought it was the coolest, you know, whatever. I was just like, I have to do this. This is something I have to do. And I've always been into tech. I've always, you know, my biggest dream ever is to mine asteroids. You know, if I could send a robot up, you know, if I could get in a spaceship like I'm playing Eve and, you know, stare at an asteroid and shoot lasers at it and collect the metal that, you know, you can coagulate with molten lasers, melting the metal down in space, or some crazy stuff like that using magnets or who knows what. But that's like my ultimate dream. If I could be born in, like, you know, 1,000 years from now, God, that would be great. So I could mine asteroids for real. But I don't think, you know, with the people in charge right now in America, you know, with, you know, super expensive. I don't know what the stats are in a starship, you know, blowing up over the Caribbean, you know, once every 3 or 4 months. You know, I don't know if we're gonna get to Mars, you guys. Like, I don't know if it's worth it. Simply because I think the humans that are going to arrive on Mars are going to be debilitated by the loss of gravity and, well, the rigmarole of reasons that we're finding out. You know, sitting in space in that radiation for a long period of time isn't really good for humans, believe it or not. So until we get serious about, you know, blowing nukes up in space and using those to project spaceships to other planets or even farther, you know, I just don't think people like Elon Musk are going to cut it. That's just my opinion. You know, what do I know? Anyway, that's total sidetrack. So, you know, I suffice said, okay, I'm not going to mine asteroids, but laser scanning things and building 3D models, or, you know, measuring things down to sub-millimeter scale, you know, I can deal with that. That's pretty damn cool still. You know, I'm happy with that. So, you know, I set myself on a trajectory to do that. I was currently in the wine business out here. Wine is really big. I'm literally driving by vineyards right now. I'm sure you can see out the window. So I used to sell wine. So I've been a salesman by trade almost my entire life. Been a big video gamer. Been a big computer guy. Started working on cars in 2017. Have a couple project cars that I build on and I fiddle with. Mostly ruin. Really not making huge improvements. Really just, you know, scope creep is real. So beware. But really, I think what happened was that I just fell into this job, you know, in where I lived, which happened to be my dream job. I found a job where I could do quality assurance and I could scan things, and, you know, I felt it was a local company. There's only one location. They've been in, you know, the area where I live in Mendocino for, you know, a long time, over 30 years, and you know, I said, what the heck? I could dedicate my life to a place like this. I could become, you know, there's a lot of people that work there that have been there 30 plus years. Really cool people. Absolutely nothing bad to say about the company. or the owner or anyone that works there. I would go back and work there if, following my dream wasn't what I've decided that I'm going to do now. And um, I worked there for 2 years, and I kept, taking in more responsibility, and I had a really cool boss who had been at the company for 12 years, and he knew more than I probably will ever know about measuring things. He used to have to do it. He used to have to make his own tools to measure things because of the certificates he's earned. He proved that he could make his own measuring device and then use it to measure something, and he's an incredible craftsman. Um, and I would say, a year and a quarter into working there, it had kind of become clear to me that um, things that were mission critical to the success of my job were not critical to my coworkers, and that could have been because they lacked the technical skill, they lacked the desire to want to learn. Could be a multitude of things. I don't know. I love them to death. I think everyone I worked with there was amazing. So, it's just how the ball rolls down the hill, let's say. And one thing that I kind of learned that was fascinating about this company, let's say, is that the longer you work there, the more your umbrella would cover. So you start out, you have a little tiny umbrella, and as you slowly work, that umbrella grows. And that umbrella can be responsibility. It could be extra things you do just to be nice, or extra things that you're determined that you need to do as your job. And my boss was really, really, really a tough guy to deal with in terms of debating, in terms of communicating with, because he was such a strong person. He knew who he was. He knew what he stood for. He knew what was right and what was wrong. He knew what was up and down. You could put him in a box, shake it up and spin it around, roll it down a hill, and he'd be able to tell you which way's north within a second. This guy was on the ball all the time. And in my inexpertise, well, that's really coming down out here. In my expertise, from my point of view, not working there very long, it looked like he was, not putting in enough effort. And that, this new project that we had obtained, we were trying to get ISO certification for the company, which is a big set of rules, that dictate, what a company does. If it's saying, something on paper it's doing, it's going to do that, so that their customers can, verify the work is good. Let's say that's a very, very generalized way of saying ISO. It was a manufacturing company, and in my inexpertise, it looked like my boss was just, not doing any work, and it looked like he wasn't, jumping on this new project. He was just kind of letting the ball roll into my court, let's say. And at the time, it was frustrating, and I felt like, why should I be forced to do this big project? I get paid, potentially half of what this dude, or less of what this dude is getting paid. He was assigned the project, but he didn't really want to do it. And in my eye, that looked like he was lazy. He wasn't doing his job. He was, effing off, basically. And the reality was that the guy had been there so long that he knew how to he had built a nice roof over his umbrella. It wasn't just an umbrella anymore. It wasn't just a tarp. It was a fortified structure that couldn't just easily be expanded. So this man had built a foundation under what he stood on, and he knew what he covered. And to get him to be convinced to make an expansion, to go to the city per se and say, hey, I'm going to make a new development on my structure. He didn't want to put in the effort to do that. He knew that it wasn't worth his time. He's getting paid to do what he's getting paid to do, and it's not worth him expanding that umbrella and then having to fortify that and make it something that he's willing to stand on and be responsible for. And in my inexpertise, I wish I had seen that perspective, but I didn't, and I became frustrated, and I didn't communicate to him how I felt about that. And basically, the moral of the story is that I probably, well, let's back up a little bit before I say anything. This guy, he didn't want to do ISO certification. He was busy doing quality management, and that was his title. It wasn't worth it to him to jump on this new ISO project that the company had tried to do previously, for no extra pay. So I understand now where he's coming from, and I understand that he is correct, and he still is correct, even though he no longer works at the company. His perspective was 100% crystal clear in that scenario. So um, that was something that I wish I had seen in that moment. So months pass. I begin working on this ISO project. In the meantime, we bring in a new plant manager. This is a guy who has a lot of similarities to what Elon Musk is doing in the American government right now, in terms of, he comes in saying that, he has all of these certificates, he has all of these, awards, and that's great. You can have a master's degree in, whatever, but the way you apply that master's degree is really, what's going to be on your headstone at the end of the day. And this guy is really, really a nice dude, and he was fun to be around, and he was fun to work with. But right away, when he started working there, it was always kind of like, I honestly thought when he started working there, it was because we were going to close the plant down and move the plant to Mexico, where he was from. This is not a Mexican, by the way. This is actually a white guy, just to clarify that. We were going to move the plant down to Mexico, where our finished products are constructed. So we make a small subcomponent of a larger vehicle, and those vehicles are constructed in Mexico. So when this guy came, moving from Mexico to California, where we are, and started working at this company, he's never been to, he basically got the job by inviting the owner on a podcast and, impressing him, I guess, with his abilities. They met at a convention. That's not my problem how they met, how he got his job. It's totally whatever. Under the bridge, doesn't matter. Nothing negative or positive to say, really. It was just kind of an interesting, unique situation working there, where someone with authority had come in just kind of blindly. And that could be because I was new to the company, and that happens all the time, or just because the owner was so impressed by this guy's work. I don't know what work he showed him, maybe the 3D printing stuff, but that's something we can get to later. But they brought this guy in, and I kind of got in this guy's ear about how I was struggling at the company because of my boss or my coworker doing things that were frustrating to me. Not working on the project like I was. I was getting paid the same amount as my coworker, but doing more work. And he listened to me, and he agreed. And time passed, and I eventually decided, it wasn't worth the stress, it wasn't worth my health, and I'm going to go find a new job. So I went and got a new job offer, doing something that was also in the automotive industry that I am, an enjoyer of. And I told, one of my best friends at the time that I was leaving the company that we worked together at. And, he was pretty devastated. He was pretty upset that, I decided to do that. And little did I know that he would go and tell this guy that I had his ear. Let's call him R. I went and told R that, or he went and told R that my best friend went and told R that I was going to quit. So they brought me into a meeting, R and HR, Human Resources, and they said, we heard you're upset with the company. We heard you're leaving. We can make it right. Just let us try to make it right. And I said, okay. I told the job offer I didn't want the job offer, and I stayed with the company. I got a 25% pay raise, which was really cool. And I basically continued to do the amount of work that I was doing, which was too much work for what I was even getting paid for with that raise, because my boss wasn't even trying to do this project. So it was kind of a confusing situation where I wasn't necessarily blackmailed, but it's like playing blackjack, and someone sneezes and hits your arm and lets someone see your cards. Just for a split second, someone can see into your hand, and through that, they can clearly take an advantage of you. So, I was stressed out because I had just had a kid. I have a 1-year-old right now, so I was stressed out about leaving my job for a new job and not really sure of what I was going to do this way or that way. And it was really tough because I really liked the company that I worked at. I liked all my coworkers. I had generally nothing negative to say except that I was being overworked, and that it was affecting my physical and mental health, in clearly negative ways as a new father, which is already tough enough for those of you who know. And I love my child, and I recommend having kids. So even though it is tough, I do recommend doing it. It's awesome. But ultimately, I decided to stay with the company, and surprise, the next day I am at a doctor's appointment telling the doctor how anxious I am, which ended up being nothing. I ended up figuring it out. It was the job, believe it or not. Funny enough, you don't need medication, you just need a new job. And while I was at this 1-hour doctor's appointment, they fired my boss, who had worked there 12 years, on the spot for not attributing work to the project that the company deemed was his job. So holy moment, or a holy F moment. I guess I'm the boss now. It's like that movie with oh God, it's like that movie with what's his face on the cargo ship. I'm the boss now. So that's going to bother me. I can't remember the actor's name. I have to cut this. So they fired my boss. So, they gave me 25% pay raise. They said, you can continue doing your job. You're doing a great job. You're doing all this extra work on top of your quality assurance job. And it was like super cool, dude. And then, surprise, we fired your boss. The plant manager, R, doesn't know how to do his job. And no one really knows how to do his job. So we're just going to kind of see what happens, I guess. And of course, I am a person who likes to solve problems. I love scope creep. I have 2 project cars that I cannot stop adding stupid things to that do not help in any way. They just make it more complex. And that's just who I am. I was the kind of person who got done with the Lego kit and was like, okay, where can we add a gun to this thing? Where can we add a new wing or a new engine to this thing? So when I'm at work, I always strive to do the best. And, really what this video is about is what I'm getting to now, which is I thought, working at my dream job was my dream. And I thought that working at what I thought was my dream job, I thought I could stay there and develop relationships and become someone that was important and developed trust and a relationship with the company. And I feel like in 2 years I was getting there. With a lot of people at the company, there were some people that were still pretty cold to me, and that's really because they had been there so long. And I seemed like some guy coming in, and after a year and a half, they took someone's job that had worked there for 12 years, and was doing let's say mediocre job at best, in my opinion. Even though I was trying my best, I just can't compete with the level of excellency that my old boss had. He was such an incredible craftsman, such an incredible engineer, such an incredible quality engineer, that someone unlearned like me, even though I have YouTube for 15 years, I've YouTube university'd my way through life. I don't have the the degrees. I don't have the efficiency that this man had, and it was after 6 months or so of doing my job, my boss's job, and working on this extra project with the new plant manager, that we were all at dinner with my 2 friends that are coworkers, that are important people at the company, and the owner of the company, and my plant manager and myself. And we were having beers, we're having a good time, we're having food, we're sharing desserts, chilling. Everything's good, everything's great. In my mind at this moment, everything is perfect. It's framed perfect. I have the right schedule to take care of my daughter. I'm making enough money that my wife and I are totally comfortable. I can work on my stupid projects and throw money at the wall um, all I want and do whatever I want, pay my bills, support everything that I can do in my life. I got it made, let's say, and um, that's such a looking back, that's such a fragile and cute moment that I had. Those few months, even though I was being overworked, even though it was negatively affecting me, in my mind, my work life was near perfect. I was doing what I wanted to do. I was measuring things all day. I got to fiddle around with really expensive gear, and shoot lasers at things and look at the 3D models I was making in real time. And it was freaking awesome. I'd go back and do it right now for free if I was a millionaire. Um, Shout out to anyone who wants to make me a millionaire. Um, so I, in this moment, I was, sharing um, a close moment with all these coworkers, colleagues of mine, and a couple of them were really close friends and still are close friends. And the owner, I don't want to say his name. I'm trying to be as confidential as possible here, just to be professional. He went around the table saying, how important the work that everyone was doing, and he went over to my one buddy, and he's the IT guy, and he was like, you're building a new ERP system with an electronic reporting system, and that's amazing for the company. And my other buddy, he said, you're doing all this robotic programming, and you know what? That's freaking awesome. And then he got to the plant manager, and he said, I'm really proud of all of the ISO work you're doing. And it was like one of those moments in an anime where like the background drops out and time freezes, and it's like you're sitting there and you can look around um, and kind of bask in the moment of like WTF. And it was in this moment, I think, that fragile belief and that fragile like perfect, I have a perfect job, perfect balance, everything's perfect, was completely shattered. Irreparably, it was shattered. And boo-hoo, poor me, and whatever. But the reality is that I realized in that moment that my superior was allowing my extra work that I wasn't really getting, me getting paid for, let's say. The extra work that I was putting in um, was being attributed to somebody else, even though all the work was documented in SharePoint, which is a Microsoft file manager. You can see who's edited files, who's worked on them, what days they worked on them. And the owner of the company hadn't taken the time to look in there and seen, whose name was on all of the work. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that he didn't do that. He had attributed the work to my superior, and my superior, kind of smiled and said thank you, and then, kind of meekly said, well, Tyler does a lot of the work too. To which the owner, just kept going on about, and it was, in that moment that I realized, holy, like I'm doing all this extra work. I'm working my dream job, let's say, but I'm doing all of this extra work for really no reason. It was, it's really something valuable that I've learned doing the work, how to run a company efficiently and how to, do what you're saying and say what you're doing correctly. But it wasn't my job. It wasn't what I got hired for. It wasn't what I got paid to do every day. And on top of doing this ISO work, my skills as a quality assurance person were growing. I was learning how to use the program and the equipment better. I was learning how to do my boss's job, who even with my pay raise was probably getting paid double what I was getting paid. So, it was just one of these moments where I was just like, holy, I'm doing my dream job, but I'm not in that dream. That's someone else is having a dream about running their company, and you can be a part of somebody else's dream and help them achieve that dream, but it doesn't always necessarily mean that you are in their version of their dream. So let me kind of break this down because I'm probably sounding like a total moron. When you're working a job, it's your dream job. It's freaking awesome. You love everything about it. You love your coworkers. You love your boss. You love your pay. You love your short commute, um, and it's your dream to be a part of the owner's dream. So you think, in your mind, okay, I'm working my dream job. I'm in my boss's dream. He's imagining when he retires and he's old, he's going to hand, this portion of the company off, to me. And in his dream, I'll be there. But that's not the reality. So don't think that. Learn from me. Um, and stop saying in videos, for God's sakes. So in that moment, this anime curtain drop moment, true power level reveal moment, I realized that my version of my boss's dream isn't the version that he is building in his mind, and that is something that struck me in that moment, and I'm not really sure why it struck me so much, but in the meantime of doing all this quality assurance stuff, I had come to be a drone pilot. I got my drone certification, and I started kind of, meekly, let's say, tiptoeing around doing drone stuff here and there. It was kind of like a fun haha thing. And I kind of built that background, in the background, let's say, after this moment, because it struck me so much. It kind of like, it was like a new chapter in a book almost for me, because I woke up, I walked out of that restaurant a different person than I walked into that restaurant. I walked in there, a team member, and someone who believed in something. And I think that's where I went wrong. I believed in something. I didn't verify with the important people and communicate with the important people that I wanted to be a part of that team. And that's entirely on me. That's my fault for doing that. And I've learned that now. I've learned that communicating clearly with people, they're just people. You can talk to them. You can say all kinds of funny things to them. And they will just respond how you believe they will most of the time. 90% of the time, people are going to treat you how you treat them. So I was nervous and didn't believe that my umbrella really covered what it covered at the company, and I didn't feel like I had a voice. So I never went to the boss, or, went to the owner, and was like, "Hey, I'm doing all this work. I want you to know that." Because I was being a baby about it. I was scared about it. I didn't feel valuable enough to spend time sitting down and telling him that I was doing work. It seemed asinine to do that. So I kept that in my pocket. I kept that moment in the restaurant in my pocket for months, I would say. And then early February, I catch wind at the company that they're and I will say my work at the company on the ISO project that was extracurricular, let's say, diminished dramatically after this moment. I lost mostly, almost if not all, interest in developing more for the program and for the company, because I knew that the work ultimately I was doing was being attributed to somebody else, who ultimately I still struggle to look back and see what work were they actually doing besides social networking and just kind of producing, I don't know what you call it, like empty work, where it's like you're doing something, but I don't know if it's what you're supposed to be doing, and I don't know if the boss knows what you're doing is efficient, and I'm not high enough up in the company to say anything or tell you what, ask you what the hell you're doing. So this guy provided a lot of teamwork and strategic development. It wasn't like he did nothing, but looking back and pointing at a day-to-day basis, it's really hard to pinpoint what he did. But but I can certainly tell you that 80%, 90%, even 95% of the time, it wasn't ISO work, because that work was done being done by me. And he picked up a little bit of that slack, I think, once he noticed that I had decelerated on the project dramatically. And I caught wind a few months later, after this anime moment, let's call it, that they were hiring someone just to do ISO. And awesome, that's super cool. But there were a couple problems. And the problem was that, firstly, this wasn't communicated to me. I found out through, let's say, subvert channels of my own finding and my own investigating. It wasn't, somebody spilling the beans that was, sharing, information that they didn't want me to find out. I found out my own ways. Let's say no one's responsible. If later on, people did tell me. Shout out to them. They're real ones. But I found out that they're going to hire this quality engineer. There were two problems. The first one, I'm not being communicated with. The second one was that his pay was going to start out $10,000 to $30,000 above my pay. So they were bringing in a guy from out of state who was new to the company, obviously. Who was just going to be doing a portion, supposedly, of the job that I was doing, that I had been doing, and that was like strike two, and I wish I could say there was a third strike, and maybe I'm missing the first strike somewhere in here. I think maybe firing my boss was the first strike, let's say. So the second strike was the restaurant moment. This was strike three. So I said, okay, I put in my last 2 weeks of baby bonding with my baby, and I said, I'm going to give the company 2 weeks. I'm just going to think about it for 2 weeks. I'm going to just break away, not crash out right now. Even though putting in my baby bonding right then was probably a pretty obvious crash out to my superior and the boss potentially. But the company was slowing down so much that we had just had a meeting that week saying, if you want to take vacation time, now is the time. Layoffs, mandatory layoffs are coming. We're running out of work to do. So I thought, maybe I could be covert in doing this, and I could, let my emotions settle for 2 weeks. And the reality is, at the end of the 2 weeks, that moment never came. That moment of clarity, that moment of like, what, I should probably stay with this company. I should stop being, such a little baby. Little hurdy-witty, little hurdy feelings. My feelings were so hurt. And honestly, they were really hurt. I worked my ass off at this company, and I thought I was a team member. I thought I was a dream member, let's say. I'm going to coin that term. And I wasn't. And it was time for me, I realized, to start my own dream. And have my dream job in my dream, and know what part I play in this dream. And I was done being a worker for somebody else doing something else, even though it was constant pay, even though it was worth it. I just could no longer do it. And I came back after the 2 weeks baby bonding, and I got to say this, during my 2 weeks away, my superior said nothing about this hire. They took my coworkers out. Excuse me. Took my coworkers out to dinner with the guy, introduced them to the company, took them around the plant, and no one at the company communicated they were going to do this. They were hiring this dude. Hey, what did I think? Hey, do you want to meet this guy? Which really just felt like a slap in the face. Honestly, it felt like, am I terrible at my job? Like, does no one care about me? And I just honestly didn't know how to respond. And it was just like, why is my superior, being shady about this? And it wasn't the first time he had been shady, but this time it was, he was being shady with me, and it's one of those things where it's like, it's not going to happen to, it's not going to happen to me. It's just happening to those people over there. Well, it did happen to me, so that does happen. So he was hiring this guy the day I was coming back from baby bonding. He said, "You know what, Tyler, take the rest of the week off." It was a Friday I was coming back on. He said, "Just take off, bro. You don't need to come in. Nothing's going on. It's slow." And I said, "Cool, dude. Cool, R. I'll stay home with the baby. I'll come in on Monday." And he's like, "Cool, come in on Monday." Um, and I knew that was because they were showing this dude around the plant, and I just didn't understand why was hiding him from me. So, I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to be totally passive, not let the situation bother me. I'm going to go in on Monday, act like nothing's wrong, pick up where I left off 2 weeks ago, and I expect my boss will say something. Somebody will say something because I deserve to know. Obviously, I thought I deserved to know. So I assumed that I was going to be communicated with. So I said, what the heck? I'm going to go in on Monday, say hi to everybody, hang out. But I did let, my friend that didn't reveal my cards, and I did let my coworker know my feelings and what was happening and how I felt about it, and how to protect themselves from, what happened to me in the future, so that they don't have the same thing happen to them. Little did I find out that one of my other friends, their dad, my best friend, his dad used to work at this company decades ago, and he experienced the same problem of the growing umbrella, where you think you know what your job is, but slowly that develops into something larger. And so this is just something that happens at this company. And I think it's because it's family owned, and there aren't good guidelines on what everybody's job is. So I think that power creep or scope creep, whatever you want to call it, at this job is a natural ecosystem that develops. And I think that's how people either find their place or find their position or find their job permanently. And that's how you have people that have done their job for 20 years. And they do the same thing for 20 years. And it just happened to be that when my superior R came in, he shook that ecosystem up. And that's when he shook that ecosystem up, getting my boss fired, that totally turned everything upside down. And from that moment, I think, of my boss getting fired, I think morale kind of degenerated at the company, because people realized that you could work at the company 10, 20 years, and if you say no to an order, let's say, or something that they want you to do on top of what you've gotten paid to do, instantaneously, without training. And if there is training, the training is going to come from someone who's below you. It's not going to be superior. So the mutual respect that they build with that is negative, because they're saying, okay, you're going to get paid the same amount of money to do more stuff, and somebody that we hired at the company, a quarter of the time ago that you've worked at the company, is going to teach you how to do this new job. And they're probably not going to teach you the best way to do it. They're going to teach you the way that they learned how to do it themselves, because they also haven't been trained. They learned this on their own. So I think that was a big moment at the company, where it was a morale shift on top of poor morale because of the company kind of slowing down with all of the political landscape of America, the post-COVID slump of the motorsports industry and the power sports industry, and ultimately the owner of the company not really putting his sights on developing the ISO with my superior and me, because ISO is something that really has to come from the top down. It's not something that some idiot like me can come into a company and a couple years develop all this work that people have worked there for 20 years are going to follow and just believe in immediately. It's something that the CEO of the company has to believe in, and they have to be the person that's saying, hey, you've been here 10 years, you've gotten paid this much money, and we give you a raise every year. Well, this year we're making you do more work, and it's just not something that somebody that works at the company that doesn't have a place of power can do. So, yeah, it was one of those moments where, I went back to work, and that Monday I went back to work, And it was kind of weird. It was like my superior didn't want to look me in the eyes. It was, I had to play the fool and act like I didn't know what was going on. They were hiring somebody for more pay and less experience than me, but and when I say less experience, he has degrees and he has actual, professional experience with other companies doing this. So it's not like the guy, is an idiot. I have no negative feelings about him. I don't even know him, to be honest. He's probably a super cool dude. I probably would have loved working with him, but it was ultimately the shady behavior of my superior that kind of led me down the road of deciding to leave the company and stop following somebody else's dream and doing my dream job and start following my own dream and start doing kind of what I would call my own dream job. And since that first strike or second strike moment, I realized that I need a backup plan, and I really like flying drones, and I thought drones were super cool. Like I said, I got my Part 107 license, and I kind of decided, I'm going to start a drone business. I'm going to start my own drone business. I'm going to, see what's out here, and what opportunities I can find, and see what develops from there. So that's where I am today. I'm following my own dream. I'm building my own dream job, and it's just like any company. It's a slow start. It's a lot about what you can provide. But what's funny is that I learned through my last dream job that it's possible to follow your dreams and have your dream job, but do it your way. And that's what I'm doing now. Is I'm flying drones, and I'm not just flying drones, but I'm doing 3D mapping. I'm doing photogrammetry. I'm doing things that I think are really cool, and I'm doing them in ways that impact local communities and local companies, and to improve the way that they do their work. So it's something that I believe in, and it's something that I think is important. It's an underdeveloped skill in this rural area, and I'm out here following my dreams. I'm driving down here right now doing something I never thought I'd ever be able to do. I'm driving down to film a rally school. It's like car rally racing, where they teach people how to rally race. So I'm going to be flying an FPV drone, chasing cars around, which back when I followed Hoonigan, that was something they were just starting to do. It was mostly dudes running around cars doing donuts in a yard. But nowadays, we can just have a drone flying around the car, and it's just kind of crazy living life. When you live your own life and you kind of decide to take the wheel and pull back the curtain on what's possible, you never know what's going to happen. And I think that you should always strive for whatever you're passionate about. Whatever makes you happy. Try to figure out a way to do that, but do it in a meaningful way that when you look back at your life, you're not living in somebody else's dream. You're living in your dream. And, I think that sounds really sappy and really stupid. And, in 6 months from now, I may be broken on the street. And, I also might be successful and, start a business. So I think that, I believe that I'm going to be successful. I think that what I, am providing to the community is important. And I think that it's important that you also follow those dreams and believe that. And don't let yourself fall into somebody else's dream, or don't let yourself fall fool to what you believe is your dream, when it's really just a hologram of what you think somebody else is dreaming about. And I think watch out for wolves at the door. And if you get a bad feeling about somebody really early on or initially, like I said way earlier in the video, when I met the guy originally, I thought we were going to move the plant down to Mexico to cut costs. So I immediately had kind of shady feelings about this guy, and I should have really trusted that. I should have left the company. I should have, I ultimately should not have gotten my boss fired for not, doing more work than he got paid to do. And and it's an important lesson, I think, on being a professional. And really, there's always so many perspectives to any situation. I was clearly only seeing my perspective in that situation, and I was upset at my boss, and I was trying to fix things in the short term, and right now I'm still trying to fix things in the short term, starting a new business, but I'm looking to solve things in the long term. And by being happier, by being physically and mentally healthier, by spending more time outside instead of in an office with a ferro arm, I get to spend outside most of the time with a drone, and then go into an office and stare at 3D models that I've built. But it's just different. I'm doing it for me, so there's an important distinction to make when it comes to following your dreams, and are your dreams really what you think they are, I guess. But yeah, that's all I got to say. Like and subscribe. Uh, you know, ring the bell, of course, if that's still a thing. Is that still a thing? I don't know. Bye, YouTube.